Grateful you've chosen to be here with us. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Patrick Lockwood, and we're having a conversation today about healing through adversity, an authentic conversation about the shadow side or the shadow aspects of behavioral health. So I thought I would just start by, Patrick, inviting you to introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are.
Great. Thanks for having me, TJ. I'm really grateful to be here. I am Patrick Lockwood. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist here in Southern California. I'm a professor at Cal Lutheran. I am the COO of Oak Forest Recovery, so I do administrative work, therapy, professor stuff, teaching, consulting. I do lots of stuff, and I'm glad I get to be here for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And you and I connected several years ago around these topics of clinicians, healers of all types, techs, anyone working in behavioral health, doing their own deeper work so that we can actually be more present for our clients rather than thinking that our clients are broken and that we're here to fix them. And
Right.
you and I have been in a conversation in the last couple of weeks specifically about some of the things that have happened in our field. We've had some people pass away in the field. And there seems to be an important focus right now on how we can come together and help one another heal and build community. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that topic. And I know it's very broad, but anything you want to share?
Yeah, I think part of what spurred this topic on, this conversation, is there's been some loss recently in the treatment industry. And, when I say the treatment industry, I mean, residential treatment centers, fancy ones, not fancy ones, public ones. And, one of the problems with working in the substance use disorder treatment industry in particular is that loss is a part of the process, unfortunately. And you and I connected recently about this topic because of someone we both knew at a big conference. And the conversation you and I started to have privately, we thought we should bring publicly because it seems like this industry itself is, in my opinion, very sick. And one of the reasons why you and I get along, I believe, is because we share a similar, let's say, diagnosis of the industry. Not to be too formal or clinical about it, it's just there's a lot of unhealed people in this industry, and I know that I'm one of them, and so I try to be conscious about that, and be thoughtful about how I show up in the world, given my limitations as a person. And one thing that seems to stick out to me about the industry in general, so the treatment providers, the business development people, the owners, the venture capital firms, all of it, it's very messy. And there's as you said, there's a shadow, right? Kind of like in the standard Jungian sense. There's this side of ourselves that we don't talk about very publicly until something tragic happens, like somebody dies, right? And so it's not to say that the whole industry is bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I think there's a lot of people, especially in positions of power, right? Leaders, treatment center owners and operators, people who have high status in these venture capital firms and they're like chief clinical officer or whatever. Like there's a lot of people who are good people. They're not sick, disgusting people. They're not bad, evil people. They're regular people who happen to care, who happen to be in the industry, who are very hurt, who see themselves in a way that you and I don't agree with, right? Like you and I are both very philosophically aligned that nobody is broken. And in fact, thinking from this broken perspective is part of what keeps the industry sick,
Yeah.
right? And so when tragedies happen, when people die, when programs close, right? It's really a sign of how sick the industry is, right? And how unhealed the professionals are. And one of my great failings, one of many of my great failings is that I can't keep my mouth shut and I'm not very diplomatic. And so I'm kind of sick and tired. This is going to be one of my less diplomatic moments. I'm very sick and tired of the very sick people who run this industry pretending like everything is okay.
Yeah.
It's very disgusting to me that, again, they're sick, so I don't judge them. I'm not angry at them, but it's disgusting that people are okay with their colleagues that they say they care about being sick.
Well, I just thank you. You and I have a little bit different way of saying it, and yet the message is the same. And the way I'll frame it, to echo what you said, is, in my experience, people come into this work with a desire to help, with a desire to be of service, with a desire to help someone either break the cycle of addiction or heal their mental health concern. And what I see happening is, as you said, hurt people hurt people. People
Right.
jump into the field quite often, maybe before they're at a place in their own healing where they can actually be truly present with someone else. So we end up in the cycle of I'm the healer and you're the broken one and I'm here to fix you. And I remember that my first job, Altamira, in 2008. I'm doing the math right. No, am I doing that math right? I don't know if I'm doing the math right. I think that's right. 2008, 48 bed facility at the time. And I remember walking in or walking up, and if you've been to Altamira, those beautiful gates that open. And I remember thinking, if I thought there were 48 broken people on the other side of this gate, and it was my job to fix them, I would be exhausted. And not
Mm,
only would I be exhausted, but it wouldn't really be effective when I come in as an equal. And I don't mean that, I'm chummy chum with the clients. I just mean as a human, equal as human beings, right? At a
yeah.
different point in my
Yeah.
own healing than maybe they are, and I have something to offer from that place, we create a very different dynamic. And I
Yeah.
know, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with that. We are, again, very philosophically aligned in this way. We are different, but we are equal in the sense that we're all human, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what I tried to lead off with. I don't believe that I'm, magically less unhealed or something than some of these people who've recently left us. What I'm imagining is that there's there are norms, right? The problem that I'm talking about that I'm fed up with are the norms in this industry,
Mhm.
right? Where people either believe that because they've been clean for a long time or that they've achieved some level of status in the industry, that they're somehow exempt from the humanness of this experience, or that their humanness matters less.
Mhm.
And the direct consequence of thinking that your humanness and your flawedness or imperfectness or whatever you want to say, however you want to spin it, matters less means that you're less susceptible to struggle and
Mhm.
burnout and your own personal failings and your character defects, to use the 12-step phrase. And so the problem that I see is the shadow of this industry is a status based shadow, which
Mhm.
is there's an ego based need to achieve, which is fine. I've achieved a lot in my life, and I don't judge the kind of raw version of achievement. What I judge is allowing the unhealed or the need to fit in with the creme de la creme
Mhm.
be more important than your humanness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen so many times too that people jump into the field early in their own recovery or
Right.
early in their own healing. Maybe they're not a person in recovery, but in their own healing of their trauma. And when I do conscious recovery trainings, I often do the check-in. Why do you do this work? And you're not allowed to say because you want to help people. That's a given. I want to know why you really do this work. And
Mm-hmm.
we go around the circle and we end up hearing that we come into this work because of our own trauma. And through that own trauma, we have a desire to heal or to help. It's a beautiful thing. We want
Mm-hmm.
to honor that and acknowledge that. The
Mm-hmm.
issue, though, that I see happening, and this is where we are aligned, even though we say it a little differently. I appreciate that you're very bold. I would say that people are well intentioned, but we've created a structure where
Mm-hmm.
we're not really talking about what's going on. Now, I've
Correct.
seen that, when I used to be, more involved in 12-step meetings. I've seen that in 12-step recovery too. Someone gets a certain amount of time, they're afraid to talk about their own stuff, so they become siloed or isolated. But when it comes to our industry, I think it's vital that we create opportunities, relationships, and communities where we can really be authentic about what's happening. I don't want to be so I don't want to be so concerned about, Patrick, if I tell you that I'm hurting this week or that I'm grieving or there's something happening, you might not send me a client. So I'm not going to talk about it. And I think
Right.
that's the deepest shadow, right? We end up becoming very transactional. You and I go to events, I more than you because I'm an extreme extrovert, but I go to events. And when I hear people talking, they're talking about their program, they're selling their program. I always just say, what's really happening for you? Let's have an authentic conversation. That's where I come alive. And the truth is we're all in an equal playing field here. And there are moments that we all need support.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying about humanness.
Yeah,
It's that I don't think that there probably are so very few truly evil people in this industry, just completely narcissistic psychopaths or greedy beyond belief. That's so vanishingly rare because I agree with what you said. Almost everyone who comes into this industry is here because they've been through something, they had a childhood trauma, whatever it was that pushed them towards a healing place, which is great. And I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is exactly what we're talking about, what you're saying, which is there's a secrecy
yeah,
which doesn't matter if you're a person in recovery or a person with PTSD, it doesn't matter what your background is. Secrecy creates shame, creates pain, creates separation.
that's right.
And it's not that we have to be best friends with everybody that we meet in the industry. It's that the people who supposedly say they care for each other when they go to these events and they hug each other and they smile, they don't care because they're not willing to actually tell secrets. They're not really actually willing to hold people accountable. Holding people accountable doesn't mean being a dick. It means being honest about your concerns if someone is struggling. It
Yeah,
means being honest about how you're willing to support someone you say you care about if they're struggling.
yeah,
I've had these conversations so many times here in Southern California with different people in the industry, people that I care about dearly, and I don't sugarcoat things with them. One of my favorite people in this industry down here has had some personal struggles. And in my private conversations with him, and he's part of a big program down here, I have never once pulled any punches, but I've also not been a dick about it. I've been like, listen, you're a good guy. What can I do to support you so that you can get back out there and start helping the people that you're really good at helping? And how are you taking care of yourself? Because if you're not, that's a problem for you, for your people in the rooms, and for your people in your business, right?
yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about, just my own perspective, I guess the philosophical framework that I've created that is conscious recovery. And that is, as I do my own healing, I can be truly present with another. And it's in that connection and attunement that one heals. And
Mm,
so if I'm not finding a way to heal or to be in the process of healing, now set aside that word for a moment. Authentic connection, vulnerability, the opposite of this secrecy you're talking about. If secrecy, silence, and judgment are the three things that cause shame to thrive, and that's a Brene Brown quote, and I love it. I've adopted it because it's so true to me. Then the opposite of that is how we then heal, or we could say stay current or stay present or stay vulnerable. And that's, openness, authenticity, and vulnerability. And so we can do that in a way one on one, and then that has a ripple effect. But I think if we as an industry, and this is what I know you're speaking to, if we as an industry are pretending like everything's fine, then we're going to miss these opportunities, right? And then we're going to
yeah.
have our colleagues dying. And that's not to make us bad or wrong, but it's a wake up call to say, how can we support one another? And I know, Patrick, you and I are up to that. We're going to be announcing something soon that's very exciting around this, that we can really help healers heal. I'm curious because we've talked enough, I think, perhaps about the issue or the problem that we see in the field. What's the solution? How do we help each other? How do we move into truly supporting one another? And I'm curious what your thoughts are. Of course, I have lots of thoughts about it, but I'm wondering what's present for you with that.
Yeah, I think the solution's very complicated, right? Because like you said earlier, there are complicated systems that have been created in this industry. So in the therapy, drug rehab, mental health, residential, whatever. Like literally there are layers, right? So these are the layers that I see. You can tell me if I'm missing anything. And so on the one hand, there's the layer of the circles that people travel in, right? And so you have the professional circles that people travel in. They go to conferences,
Yeah.
right? The big, fancy conferences all over. There's NATAP, there's West Coast, there's all these things, right? But then there are the personal circles that people travel in. So, like recovery groups and
Yeah.
things like that. And people blend these two things. And
Mm,
that's natural to some degree. But one of the problems with that is when you're not adequately having the correct boundaries in these various circles and between these two circles,
mm,
what happens, I think, is people become emotionally corrupted. Their difficulties in their personal life start to become part of their professional life.
mm.
And I'm not the kind of person that believes in such a thing as work-life balance. I think that's a bullshit phrase. I think that life is life and
Yeah.
your working is part of your life,
Yeah.
you know? And so what I believe is that when people aren't focused on the correct boundaries, right? Like my favorite example of this is when there's these big conferences and it's supposedly a recovery conference, but half of the people go out and gamble and smoke cigars all night.
Yeah.
And like, again, I'm not trying to be mean. I don't see how that's recovery.
Yeah.
I see how that is old behavior.
Mm,
And it's a wide open secret. There are many wide open secrets,
yeah.
and no one talks about them with any honesty. People talk about them as if they're like norms that exist. But is that actually good for us? And who's having that conversation?
Yeah.
I'd like to have that conversation
Yeah.
publicly with lots of people,
Yeah.
right? I'm not against gambling. I'm not against nicotine. I'm not against anything. If you could be sober and do those things, that's great. But I doubt that you're living the most spiritual possible life if you're prioritizing that over your sleep,
Yeah.
for instance. I really doubt it. I really do doubt it because I don't think you're in touch with your body and everything that you need. If you're going to go to some conference, pretend to be sober and pretend to be a person in recovery and pretend to care about yourself and be a role model if you're willing to fuck your sleep for the sake of having fun with the boys.
Yeah. So, how do we support one another in the midst of this? I know you and I have dedicated ourselves to this. I'm doing my conscious recovery workshop on the 28th of this month. If anyone wants to join in Los Angeles, that's a place where we drop in because to me the deeper work and that phrase gets used a lot. So I'll just say the authentic expression of what it truly means to be a healer or a clinician, whether we're in business development, whether we're an admissions person, a tech, a therapist, regardless of what role we have in this field, we're all part of a healing system, right?
Yeah.
The deeper approach is really dropping in and connecting authentically, starting with ourselves, right? So the workshops are all based in an experience of authentic connection. And the more authentically we are connected with one another, the more we truly see one another, and the more I truly know who and what I am, right? Understanding my essential self, who I am, that's not the role that I play. And I'm doing that work or that expression is coming through me, then I can become very effective in my work and I'm not feeling burnt out. I'm not siloing myself. I'm not keeping secrets and I'm not pretending like everything's okay. When we see, I remember the first time my friend who was a therapist, and I love him very deeply. I was probably 3 or 4 years in the field and he was in private practice and he was thriving and he suicided, right? And I was shocked, and at the same time, I started asking myself, what was I not seeing? What was I not asking? What was really happening where we weren't able to connect with one another authentically so that we cannot continue to perpetuate this? And again, I always want to say it's not from a place of rightness or wrongness, but we see what's happening. How can we be part of shifting this paradigm? That's my curiosity.
Yeah, I think part of shifting the paradigm is exactly what you're talking about, which is getting people in a room
Yeah.
and talking about what's actually going on. So there is probably more depth that needs to be explored for some people. Some people have, I think, unhealed trauma. Some people have unhealed shame. And that's not weird. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's normal. I think that on
Absolutely.
average, the vast majority of people who work in this industry have various unhealed parts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
What also I think needs to be done is we also need different cultural norms. That's what I
Yeah.
was talking about earlier, because I think you can start to help some people heal, and that will shift culture slowly to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also think that's the bottom up approach is what you're talking about. Like, come
Yeah.
to my workshop, I'll help you heal. Awesome. That's going to appeal to probably 10%
Yeah.
of the world. But then how do we get mass appeal? How do we shift things big picture? Well, I think that has to come from the top. I think when you go to fancy conferences like West Coast or Cape Cod or NATAP, the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers, when you go to these big organizations, who is actively having the conversations in these rooms with the leaders, with the power players? Because in my opinion, these norms and these norms around secrecy, these norms around shame, these norms around burnout being a part of your job, right? If you're going to be a high performer who makes six figures plus a year, either being a business development person, a marketing person, a CEO, a COO, whatever it is, your responsibility is to burn yourself out for the good of the company. Your
Yeah.
responsibility is to be such a high performer at all costs to your personal mental health, your recovery, your spirituality,
Yeah.
right? Whenever we start having that conversation in
Mhm.
front of people, when we start putting principles before dollars, principles before status, and that becomes a norm from the top down, I think we'll see some change because it's doable. Because this happens. This is what I've done as a consultant before in my life. I've gone into treatment centers and I've talked to operators and clinical directors and said, what are the values of this company and how are you living in accordance with them?
Yeah.
Because if your business practices, if your treatment team aren't in alignment with your principles, then there's literally no way. Not metaphorically, there's literally no way.
Yeah, and not just in concept. Not we're not talking conceptually. We're talking in practice, right? And I remember when I was working full time in treatment, and I remember saying to my wonderful friend, and she was the executive director, we are not doing what we're really encouraging our clients to do around self-care, around, and I agree with you. I'm not talking work-life balance, but if we're literally going from one session to the next, to the next, to the next, to group, to notes, and then I'm gone, and I realize I haven't eaten today, but that's just on the surface. The deeper conversation here is what we're wanting to have, and like I'm
Mm,
excited now, Patrick, because when you're talking about the top down, I am like very excited because I have a little PTSD around private equity in our field, and I'm going to name
yeah,
it, right? And to be able to reach those people, to have these conversations around leading with principle and leading with the actual deeper mission, because we say things like, well, we're a mission driven program. And maybe the people can say these are the principles that we live by, but are we? And let's not do it from a place of judgment, but from a place of curiosity. And if we're not, then we say, how can we start doing that more? How can we have these conversations? I'm excited to hear you say, let's have these conversations. I want to just sign me up, right? And
yeah,
again, and I want to be really clear because you said this, and I want to be clear, and I want to say it out loud too. We're not saying we're the two healed ones that here are here with the answer. I'll put it in the eye. I'm saying like at any given moment, I can be in a place where I need love and support, and I need to feel safe enough to say, Patrick, I'm really hurting. I'm really realizing that this stuff is coming up, or there's a deeper level of healing that's happening for me. So, we're not coming from a place of like, we're the healed ones and everything is messed up and we have the answer, but we want to be curious as an industry about how we can start to shift this.
exactly. I mean, you and I have a track record of trying to live this way because we've had, I don't know how many coffees in the last 3 years where we're both very
Quite a
honest
few.
about where we're at, right? We've
Right.
had perfectly candid, non-political, non-socially glad-handing conversations where it's like, I'm burnt out today, or I don't know what to do, or I'm at this crossroads, and it's been honest, and it's not been in any attempt to manipulate each other or to pretend that we're okay with each other. It is just transparency. And it's not like I'm your best friend on the planet, but I've been there for you in the way that you've been there for me, which is why we're good collaborators, right? Because we can be honest about personal things, professional things, and it's a bare minimum of being transparent for the purpose of being in a relationship that actually works. Not an as if relationship, one that
Yeah.
actually works, right? And that's what I'd like to be able to bring to leaders in private equity or venture capital firms, right? Like, as a consultant, what I've seen is if you actually get people to align in your organization with their values, and I do this at my treatment center, Oak Forest, when we're focused on our principles of recovery and things like that as individuals, as a team, as administrators, we make more money. So I'm not sitting here saying we should become, you know, perfectly pious Buddhist monks who don't care about achieving things. I love to achieve things.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, to me, like the magic hack of this entire experience for all of us to help our industry heal and deal with our shadow better is to integrate it. That's what Carl
Yeah.
Jung says,
That's
integrate the
right.
shadow, which means if you have a desire to achieve, I love that. Can we do it in a way that isn't going to destroy your morals, your mental health, your program, your family, and your friends? Can we actually make more money by being more integrated and being a better leader and being a better example of what you say you are? Because people actually like you more when you come across more authentically. People love
Yeah.
authenticity.
It's true. I'm gonna pivot right now and see if we have some comments.
Okay.
I know you and I could just talk for hours. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a look. Nicole, I'm just going to read the comments that we know many Nicoles. This is one of
Yes, we
them.
do.
And she's saying, well, hello, hello. Oh, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I have seen this over and over and see this still more often than not. I'm not sure exactly what she's referring to, but something we were talking about there. She also said many people exchange substances for a more socially acceptable habit or addiction without
Mm,
doing inner work to heal,
mm.
and then begin working in the recovery field and create toxicity for staff and clients alike. Well, yes, Nicole, we agree with that. Patrick, do you want to say anything more about that?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And the toxicity piece, I want to just underscore just for a second. The problem that I see is that people believe that they can secretly do things that are antithetical to their mental health and their recovery, and they believe that it's only going to affect me. So if I can
Right.
secretly gamble or secretly have a bunch of affairs or secretly steal or secretly do body brokering or secretly do whatever it is that's bad for you, and your principles and antithetical to your principles, it doesn't stop with you. We are relational beings. And
Right.
so when we're at our best, everyone can feel it. When we're taking the best care of ourselves, everybody can feel it. And not that we have to be perfect, right? It's just that when we're in alignment with our principles, people feel it and it
Yes.
affects other people. And so, what I want on the positive side is if we start to create more principled leadership experiences that are anti burnout and pro mental health, that
Yeah.
are pro integration of the shadow, right? What I believe will happen is that secret toxicity that's like mold that's in the corner
Mm.
over there that you know is making you sick, but you can't quite see it because it's hidden under the floorboard. If we can get rid of that, more people are going to get sober.
Yeah.
Programs are going to have less burnout, less staff turnover. People are going to die less. People are going to make more money. And I don't mean to be like super Pollyanna about it. It's just like when people live their principles and try their best to be integrated, not perfect, just try their best, things generally get better. That's it.
That's
And
that's
and
right.
I would love to be part of that.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of moving toward the end of the conversation, not that we've set at a specific time, but I'm curious if we could dive a little more deeply into what it means to actually integrate the shadow. Because as you said, the shadow, of course, is the shadow because we have siloed it or we have buried it or we have ignored it or pretend like it's not there. That by its very nature is the definition of shadow. aspects of self that I have abandoned, self-abandonment. I'm going to pretend like it's not there. I'm certainly not going to let you know, but I'm also really going to hide it from myself. And we
Yeah.
know in the individual journey, and we've already talked about this, but I wanted to sort of like go back to it one more time. The integration of the shadow always starts with an acknowledgement of it and a safe place to bring it up into conscious awareness so that we can take a look and heal it. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Of course, there's individual shadow work, and then there's this industry-wide shadow work that you and I are very curious about right now. I'll say I was going to say it's my project for 2025, but I didn't want to use that term. But, I feel passionately about helping this field do as much of this work as possible so that, because you named it, we all want to help people. Yeah, we all want to be successful. That's great. But the more we do this, the more people we can actually heal. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, perhaps in closing or as we move toward closing.
Yeah. What do we do to heal the shadow? What does it look like to integrate? So I definitely agree. The first step is almost always, no matter what theoretical modality you use, what philosophy of therapy you use, we have to name the problem. And then secondarily, I think we have to really, truly, fully understand it, right? Like I think different shadow aspects, different pieces of ourself that we don't want to see show up in various facets of our life, right? And I think that if we don't understand all the different ways in which it can show up, right? Because it can show up on a one-to-one basis in particular contexts, right? So maybe it only shows up when you're at these, like maybe you're keeping it together during your day-to-day life at the treatment center you work at. But then, like when you get a chance to kind of unwind and you go to a conference or whatever it is, then it kind of comes out. Or maybe you have a spouse, right? Or a partner of some kind. And like maybe you keep it together when your spouse or your partner is awake, but maybe when the lights go out and it's dark at night, you get to let your secret self
Mm.
come out while that person's asleep, right? There's just so many different, there's dozens of ways in which our unintegrated self doesn't ever see daylight. And so part of what we get to do, I think, on the individual level, like you're talking about, but also at the systemic level, from the top down, when we go to these conferences and have these conversations in public, is what are the ways in which these pieces of our shadow are disintegrated and how
Yeah.
can we integrate them? Because if it shows up in our business development practices, or if it shows up in our conference behavior, if it shows up in our private conversations after the conference, or wherever it shows up, it doesn't really matter to me. Again, I'm not judging because I do just as many messed up things. I just try to own it if I can, right? And so I'll try to own it better if I can. But we have to be able to have not only the acknowledgement conversation, but the understanding conversation. Because until you understand all the ways that it shows up, it's going to be whack a mole.
Yeah.
We'll take care of it over here, but not over here.
Yeah, and I also, as you were talking, I was thinking about the importance of compassionate connection and compassionate understanding of each other. I think sometimes what these side conversations that I hear is a judgment of another, or did you hear, right? Like there is a lot of gossip in the field, and that's a human tendency. And
Yeah.
I I loved gossip until it became too painful. I'm not high and mighty about it. It just is it's too soul crushing. I can't do it, and I know what gets created from it. And I'm also aware, very clearly aware that if I'm talking about someone else, I'm really just talking about myself. That's
Yeah.
literally all I'm doing. So, the person who is the one that everyone goes to and tells everything, I know what's really going on there. And again, I understand that, and I see that that's part of the human tendency. But the shadow side of that, and that in itself is in the shadow, is this idea of siloing or separation or feeling isolated or feeling like, I'm in this place, a position of power of some sort that I can't go and tell people what's really going on because maybe people will gossip. And I see it, and on one hand, it can be heartbreaking for me just on a personal emotional level. And then I'm also like, how can we be part of, and that's really the question I'm always going to come back to, Patrick, as you know, is how
Mm.
can each of us be part of healing this and shifting this? And I think we've
Yeah.
really set down some very interesting talking points, but also some very interesting action points moving forward from this conversation. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's anything else that's up for you kind of in closing that you want to say in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say just a quick thing about gossip real quick because again, I think you and I are very philosophically aligned. I don't like how gossip feels. I'm not good at it. I can't keep my mouth shut. So I say things publicly I probably should say privately. And like I think it's normal, like you said. There's nothing weird or pathological about gossip. In fact, there's actually interesting papers in evolutionary psychology about how normal and useful and adaptive gossip is. So
Yes.
there's even an argument that it's good. What I want, right, my takeaway from this conversation and from the situations that led up to this is I don't want us to be perfect. I don't want us to look fancy or be special. What I want us to do is not necessarily be more of our word necessarily. What I want us to do is try to have a better relationship with these pieces of ourselves. So if you like to gossip because you like to have the social and emotional upper hand, can you have a better relationship with that urge? I don't
Mm,
expect anybody to get rid of any of these urges. Lord knows, obviously, as evidenced by this conversation, I am nowhere close to perfect. And I'm very judgmental and I'm very intense and very impassioned about the hurt that's happening in this industry. I'm in fear, so I'm judgmental, right? And because of that, I have to own that, understand it, and see if I'm being more of a force for good in the way I'm handling myself or less of a force for good, right? And I think I've done both in this conversation. And that's me
wow.
trying to be honest, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, I feel like I can do better next time. Not be
Mhm.
perfect, not be pious, because I'm clearly not. What I want, though, is I want myself and everyone else who's interested in this conversation, especially at the leadership level of this industry, to be more in touch with these disintegrated pieces of themselves, these shadow pieces, and try to start to have better relationships with them. Let's be more honest about money in this industry.
Yeah.
Let's be more honest about body brokering. Let's be more honest about urinalysis scams at treatment centers. Let's be more honest and open about all these things, not for the purpose of dividing and shaming and judging, but for the purpose of being curious. Like you said, curious is the perfect word, in my opinion, and collaborative. How can we support each other and have better relationships when we see that people are struggling? How can
Yeah.
we maybe not judge less? Because I don't think it's impossible. I personally believe that it's the four agreements are wrong. It's impossible to judge, not judge. We're going to judge. But what are we going to do with that judgment? Are we going to have a pathological relationship with that judgment? Are we going to have a more adult integrated relationship with that judgment? Right. And that's what I'd like to have as a big national conversation, right?
Amazing.
How can we be more curious and collaborative?
Yeah. And it's interesting that you're saying that because as you were speaking, I was thinking about the other shadow aspect about, and this I think will be our final talking point, but the one of the ways I see the shadow showing up in this field is through this fierce competition, right? And
Mm,
there are a couple of players in the field that tend to want to call out programs for not being ethical, even though I know personally some unethical things they have done.
yeah.
Personally, I have witnessed it, and
Yeah.
they're calling people out,
Yeah.
and that just comes from our woundology, as my friend Simple Hayes says, our own woundology, right? It's much easier to point a finger. We know all of this. Some of it is so basic and yet it's happening. So
All the
how
time.
do we navigate? Because I know that there, people have come to me privately and said, but I'm afraid to speak up because this
Mm,
person will call me out and publicly humiliate me and maybe even sue me, right? So this is going on, and this is what I do. I'm not necessarily saying it's the right thing to do, but if I hear that, I pick this little device up called my phone and I call that person and I say, "Hi, I hear you're saying this. Can we please talk about it?"
yeah.
There was someone telling people not to come to my emergence conference because one of the speakers had been unethical. So I called the person and of course they denied saying it. I'm like, well, I know you're saying it. What's unethical about this person that's speaking? I just want to know, right? So I was curious, and it turned out to be completely unfounded. This person was not unethical. I don't know what was being played out, but this person was literally spreading the word to not go to emergence. And what is what is interesting for me is how it's so obvious to all of us witnessing what's really happening. No
Mm,
one is believing this person because the person just continues to do it. So it's deeply sad to me. And then the side conversations are, what are we going to do? This person's really loud,
mm,
right? And so I want to always come from compassion, always come from curiosity. And the only way I know how to work with any kind of triangulation is to say, hey, Patrick, rather than telling me your issues with this person, why don't we call Angela? Not that we would ever have an issue with Angela Chanter because we love her, but let's call Angela and include her, right? So we
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
we close that loop. And some of that is basic therapy or basic
yeah,
recovery,
yeah,
and yet I see it happening.
yeah. I mean, and also, which program is perfectly ethical? I don't know of a program that does literally everything correct at all hours of the day. So, if we're going to be honest about ethics in this industry, everyone, myself included, should come under scrutiny because I know for a fact that my program is not perfect. Now, that doesn't mean that we're doing obviously illegal things. I'm very clear that Oak Forest is not doing obviously illegal things. That being said, I know that some decisions that have been made have not been the best and not been perfect with regard to ethics. I'm clear on that,
Especially in hindsight, right? Especially in hindsight, you can look
especially in
back. Yeah.
hindsight.
Yeah.
And because of that, what I do is I try to be accountable to myself, to my business partners, to my consulting clients, my staff, everybody, own when a mistake was made,
Yeah.
if it's truly a mistake, and try to do it better. That's what they call living amends, as I understand it. And
Yeah.
so my goal is not for people to be perfect or the most ethical on the planet because that's not possible. We are all human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to be impulsive. We're going to make decisions out of ego and fear and all these things. And that's normal. What I want, what I hope, my prayer is that these conversations happen more and more and more so that we can be more collaborative with each other, support each other as opposed to just pointing. Like, I don't like pointing. That's stupid. I'm an adult. This is not high school. I don't care who's having sex with who or who. I don't care. What I care about, literally, is that if you say you're good at something and you want to help people, how can I support you in getting better at that thing and or helping people more by getting out of your own way?
Yeah, because when
That's what I
when
care about.
you're talking about when you as you're speaking, I'm thinking, what happens, and I'll just say for me personally, what happens when that the phone rings and someone says, I know you know a lot of people in the field, where's the best place to send this person? Do I first look at the relationships that I have a financial relationship with? Are they the first ones that come to mind? And if they are, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, as long as I'm asking myself the question, am I clear that this is going to be a good fit for this person? I'm going to do a shout out. We already shouted out Dr. Angela Chanter as one of our favorite people, but I'm going to do a shout out to Shannon Clay because Shannon Clay is literally the person I send every one of my referrals to because, and I'm sorry if I'm calling you out, Shannon, but she will say, I don't care who I work for. I work for that family and I work for that client. If
Yeah.
my company isn't okay with that, they are welcome to move me along and I'll find a company that is. And
Yeah.
because I know she genuinely will do that, I refer 100% of my clients directly to her and then she will say maybe one of our programs is a great fit. Maybe this program across town or across the country is another fit.
Yeah.
Let me give you all the options. And she's just my way shower for that. She's an example. It's very interesting. She's 40 years in recovery and 38 years in the field. So sometimes it does happen that people jump
Yeah.
in kind of early in their recovery and they have a remarkable career. So I
Yeah.
wanted to shout out to her. Patrick, we're coming to a close. Is there anything that we haven't said or that you want to leave? I also feel like this is just the beginning, this
Mm.
conversation. I feel
Hmm.
like we're going to have more of these in some formats, in different formats, but I'm curious if there's anything you want to say in closing.
I guess the one thing that really sticks out to me is that this conversation is so crucial to me because my belief is that we have a very unhealed industry, people that literally are struggling with their shadow on a regular basis. And it hurts me. It makes me feel very sad, to be quite
Mm.
honest. when good people don't make it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And that's just like the most obvious example of it. There are many, many, many more subtle, insidious things that happen in this industry that I wish I could help more disappear because we all are in this for the same basic reason, which is we want to see people thrive.
Yeah.
And when I see people suffering as opposed to thriving, when I see the people who are trying to help suffering as opposed to thriving, that really hurts me. And that's why I get so fired up. So if I've
Yes.
offended anybody today, I really want you to know it's not because I'm that mean. I'm a little mean, to be fair, but it's really because I don't want the people that I care about to suffer unnecessarily. There's already so much necessary suffering in life. I would like for the unnecessary suffering to go. And so whatever I can do to be part of this conversation with you, maybe privately at first and then publicly, I will have I would do this conversation publicly with anybody anywhere in the world
I
at
love it.
any time because
I,
it actually will help change. If we had this conversation once a day, I'd be thrilled because it would change things. So anyone who wants to have this conversation with me or TJ or whatever, let me know. I'm down and I'll do it. No shame, no secrets. Let's do it.
Wow, I love it, Patrick. That is quite a bold statement. We are up to something behind the scenes. Patrick and I are talking about something to be part of the solution, and it's a great passion of mine. So we'll be letting people know about that. In closing, what I want to say is I want to honor everyone who works in this field, everyone who has said yes to this deep calling. And I know that at the root, at our core, we're doing it for the reason that we want to be of service, we want to help people. Sometimes maybe we've lost our way a bit. I know I have. This, as Patrick said, this isn't about always being meticulous in every single decision and every single thing. God knows I have a shadow, and Lord, I mean, definitely I get to work with that on a daily basis, sometimes easier than others, but I want us to come together and normalize that conversation. So I see an industry of thousands of people who work in this field wanting to make a difference. And I am so grateful to you, Patrick, that you have the courage to speak to it in such a direct way. So for everyone watching right now, please reach out to both of us. Patrick's a little bit less on social media. I'm everywhere. You can't miss me, as everyone knows. So just reach out to me, DM me. We'll have a private conversation with you. We'll have a public conversation with you because we're ready to be part of the change. So, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So, Patrick, thank you for your yes to that. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Of course, if you're not watching live, you're going to be watching this in the replay because I'll share it in as many addiction, recovery, and behavioral health groups as possible. So, thank you, Patrick, very much for this conversation. Everyone else, to be continued. Peace and blessings, everyone.